will show on the software, and someone can then respond to it. It also supports text messaging, so you can do text messages from the dispatcher to a radio or to a group. Telemetry, you can do telemetry. It's got audio encryption, it's got remote programming, speed alarm, timing messaging, phone interconnect, reports and stats. So I'll go through each and every function and then explain how it works, how it looks, so that you guys can see the capabilities of Smart Dispatch. So just to also, before I start going into the actual presentation, so we spoke last week, we spoke about migrating from analog to digital, the benefits. Then we spoke about all the different radio models and mobiles. And today we're going to talk about Smart Dispatch. So Smart Dispatch brings the whole picture together for you to be able to have all these functions working. So Smart Dispatch, in my opinion and my experience, this is what sells the system. This is what customers normally or convinces customers to invest in buying a Hytera system, because the Smart Dispatcher and the capabilities allow for them to have so much more than just radio communications. So all of these functions come with Smart Dispatch in the basic package. So if you take the basic package of Smart Dispatch, it includes all these functions. There's no additional licenses needed to unlock specific features. The only licenses is if you had to add additional radios or add additional repeaters, those are all licensed. But for the functionality and the features, this is included in the basic package. Okay. So if we look at the GPS tracking, so these are the types of GPS trackings that you can do. So you can track radios live as they are moving. You can also, from the GPS map, you can see, you can also, for every radio, you can have a specific icon. So you can have a vehicle or a bicycle or a portable. So I'll show in the software as well all the different options. But you can basically determine which radio is being used, if it's in a vehicle or if it's a portable radio, and from the icons you can see that. The icons also is color coded, so if there is an emergency, it will typically show red on the map for the radio that has the emergency. If there's a radio that's in distress or out of a geo-fencing zone, it will then also show red on the map. It also has the capabilities for you to be able to do what we call history track. So if you want to know where a specific radio was in a specific time, you can actually, from the software, you can run a report, select the radio, choose from this date to this date, and it will show you all the positions where that radio was in that period. You also, like I mentioned, you can do online tracking, live tracking. You also can hide specific radios. If you don't want to see all the radios where they are, you can also only select which radios you want to see on the map, and you can hide the rest. And then it also supports Google Earth Maps. It uses, you can use satellite or you can use Google Street, the normal Google. Okay, so this is from the GPS positioning point of view. This is typically what it will look like. So you'll see here at the bottom, you'll see on the left hand side, it shows all the different radios, different channels on this that's been connected to the Smart Dispatcher. Here you can see some radios that are online and where they are. This is a live tracking, and it's also has a little line that's drawn to show where the radio has been and where it's moving towards. Okay. It's also just, again, you'll see on the left hand side, so the yellow icons here is radios that are online, and the gray ones are radios that are offline. Okay, so when it comes to dispatching capabilities, you can do basically all the types of calls that you can do from a radio. So you can do a one-to-one, you can do a group call. You can also, from the dispatcher, if there's more than one dispatcher connected to the system, you can do communication between two dispatchers. It has the audio link capabilities. I'll explain that more in detail when I show you guys the actual software. You can also interconnect it to a telephone system. So from a dispatcher, you can also do calls out to the public network, and you can also connect that call to a radio. And then also you can do call logs. So you can run reports to see when people were talking, who the person was, what they said. You can play back the audio as well. And then from the dispatcher as well, you can also do enable, disable. Okay. So you'll see this is typically what the screen, so you can have multiple dispatchers here. Each dispatcher here is a time slot on the repeater or a specific mobile that's connected to the system. And you can then, from this here, you can choose what group, like for example, here it says all call, but if you click there, it will give you the option to a different group or to a specific radio, and then you can use this specific time slot to communicate to that radio or to that group. Okay. Okay, again, this just shows if you're busy talking, so you'll see like the blue here, meaning you're transmitting. This here is hang time, meaning this person was speaking. You can also, for every radio, have a photo of the person using the radio. So in some cases, if you want to not just have a name of the radio, but you want to physically see the picture of the person that's using the radio, this is also possible for you to upload the photo of the person using the radio, to give it a more personalized feeling. Okay, this is just a screenshot of what the reporting looks like. So you can, from this reporting, you can either see when the radio was switched on, when it was switched off. You can go to specific call logs, you can go to specific messages, you can go to alarms. So you've got multiple options to select. I'll also show this when I'm actually demonstrating the software itself. But there's multiple reports that you can run from this, and you can also export those reports into an Excel format, and then you can share it to someone as well. Okay. Okay, so this just shows again using the audio link function. So let's say I've got a radio in a network here, and I've got a different radio in another network, and I want these two radios to talk to each other. I can use the audio link function on Smart Dispatch to communicate from the one system to the other system. Okay. This is what it would look like if you had an emergency. So normally if a person triggers the emergency, it will have a red bar here at the top. It will also have a alarm, so the dispatcher will hear the alarm. And then also, depending on what option you choose in the configuration, it will either jump to the map and show you on the map where the person is, or if, like in this case, it will actually show the person on the display here, red at the top, which is the person that triggered the alarm. Okay. This is the messaging test. So from here, you can select if you want to do a group message or private message. You'll see it's a lot like instant messaging capability. So you can type a message here, and then you can then send it. And then if the person responds to you, you'll be able to read the response, and then you can also then reply back to it. Let me just see. I think there's a question. Okay, no questions yet. Okay, so you can do text messaging as well from the Smart Dispatch. There's also an example. So let's say you are here, you're the dispatcher. Sorry, this is the email capabilities. You can also do emails from email exchange. So it can be a POP3 or SMTP server. And if an email is sent from outside, it can forward that email to the radio. Just take note that it can only do 256 characters, and it can't support images or video because we're on a narrowband system. It can only do text messaging, and you can also respond from the radio back to that email as well. I've never had any customer wanting this function, but it is there. Okay. You can also, like I mentioned, you can also connect the Smart Dispatcher to a IP telephone system, and this would allow for you to be able to make phone calls from the Smart Dispatcher to the public network, to a cell phone or to a landline. Okay, and then this is the reporting screen. So from here, you can run specific reports. So you can have any traffic that went through the system, it will be recorded, and you can run reports and have access to that information. Okay. This also supports telemetry. So telemetry is if you're connecting a radio to a telemetry device. For example, if you want to open a door or switch on a light or open a gate, You can, from the smart dispatcher, send a telemetry command over the radio network, and it will then trigger the telemetry device, which will then open a gate or switch on a water pump, for example, or any of those. So the smart dispatcher supports the telemetry function as well. You can also do audio encryption. So like I mentioned in the previous webinars, you can do end-to-end encryption between radios. You can also do encryption from the dispatcher to the radio. It also supports over-the-air programming. So these are the functions that you can do over the air. You'll see it's very limited. So you can change like a radio's ID, you can change the name of the radio, you can change the color code, you can choose slot operation, meaning slot 1 or slot 2, or you can select pseudo trunk. You can also change the frequencies. This is a very dangerous feature or function, because if you enter the incorrect frequencies, the radio will not be connected to the network anymore if you made a mistake, and you would then have to recall that radio to manually program it. And you can also change the RX group list. So for example, let's say a radio out in the field belonged to a specific group, and now you want to change it to belong to a different group. You can change it over the air, and you can also change the TX contact, meaning when you transmit from the radio, which group or which radio it must talk to. So you can manually, or you can do this over the air instead of doing it from the actual radio. Okay. And then it also has what we call speed alarm. So you can set on the software if a vehicle is traveling faster than 100 kilometers per hour, for example, it can then send a speed alarm to the dispatcher, and the software will also then send a message to the radio to say you're overspeeding, and then it will also be recorded in the actual software. So you can run reports afterwards for overspeed, and you can see exactly which radio was overspeeding at what time and what was the speed the person was overspeeding at. You can also put a buffer. So let's say, for example, if you set the speed alarm for 100 kilometers per hour, and you can put a buffer for 5 seconds. So even if the person goes faster than 100 kilometers per hour, it won't trigger the alarm immediately, but after 5 seconds, if the speed hasn't been reduced, it will then send the speed alarm out to the dispatcher and to the radio as well. And then you can also do timing messaging. So timing messaging is a function where you can set the software to automatically send a specific message to a radio or to a group of radios. For example, let's say every week on a Friday, there's a meeting at 2 o'clock. You can, from the software, set it up to send a message at 1 o'clock to say, as a reminder, remember to join the meeting at 2 o'clock, or it could be any, like, if let's say you want to control which radios need to go on break, or which person needs to go on lunch, you can from here also configure it so that the user of the radio will get a notification to say, okay, you can go on lunch, and then get a notification or message again to say return back to work. You can also do it from this software, and you can set it up once off, and it will automatically send the message out every time when the person needs to go on lunch or return back to work. Okay, and then for every call or every activity that goes through the system, you can also add notes to this. So let's say if an emergency was triggered and the dispatcher handled that call, they can also make a note to say what was the emergency for. They can put some information on there. For example, if a person needed to do something special or specific, they can add a note there to this emergency. So after, if there's post analysis done, you can pull reports, you can see the time when the emergency came through, you can see the note which was made from the dispatcher, how it was handled. You can also even, from the voice recording, you can go and pull the voice recordings for that emergency. So you can have all of this information as well if you need to do post analysis after an emergency was triggered or an incident happened. Okay. You can also, from the search, when you're doing your reports, you can also search like for specific keywords for a message, and you can select from what date to what date, and it will then highlight or bring out all those messages that have that specific keywords in the text message. Again, like I mentioned before, from the reporting, you can do overspeed alarm. You can see then when the you can choose from which date to which date, and then you'll see all the people that overspeeded the set speed limit that you've set in the software. This just shows you the subcall capabilities. So from the smart dispatch, you can register this to a SIP server as an extension, and then on the actual software it becomes like a soft phone, and you can then manually dial from the screen and make a call out into the public network. You can also receive calls from external, so if a person calls from outside of the organization into your telephone system, you can also then be transferred to that specific extension number, which is where the dispatcher is, or it can be set up so that it goes automatically to the dispatcher. So it also has call taking capabilities, and that will also be recorded as well. Then it's got the radio registration service. So what this basically does is every time when the radio is switched on or when it's switched off, it will report its status. So for example, if I switch my radio on, it will send the online status to the software. The software will then receive the acknowledgement, and it will then show that the radio is online on the software. If the person had to switch off the radio, it will then send an offline status, and then it will show that the radio is offline. You'll also notice that there's a function where you can set the time. So every 5 minutes or every 2 minutes, the radio will send its online status. If the software doesn't detect that the radio received the online status, it will automatically show the radio is offline. So it could have been where the radio moved out of coverage and is no longer connected to the system or the network. It will then, after the set time that you set in the software, it will then show that the radio is offline. So, and you can also pull the report to show when the radio is on or off, or when it was switched on or off from the system. So you'll see there's a quick GPS function. This is specifically in the CPS of the programming of the radios. So you get two types of, or actually there's 4 ways how you can have radios report GPS. So you can either use time. So you can say every 2 minutes the radio needs to send its position. Or you can use distance. So every time when the radio starts moving, let's say every 500 meters, it will report its position. Or you can use it when you press the PTT from the radio, it will then send the position at that moment when the person talks. Or you can have what they call quick GPS. So quick GPS is a handy feature, especially if you have a lot of radios that you need to track or want to track from the system. You can then set the reporting intervals, and then you can give every radio a reporting order number. So for example, let's say if you had 200 radios and you needed those 200 radios to report their GPS, if you use the quick GPS function, it gives more structure to the radios instead of all of them sending every 2 minutes and competing for that time slot. So if you use the quick GPS, every radio will report its position in the order that you give it. So for example, like this year, this is the reporting interval, which is 60 seconds, and it will then send it every 60 seconds, the radio will report its position, but depending on the order number, if one radio is 1, the second one must be 2, 3, 4, and so on. And I think for this specific, sorry, I just need to move this away. So for this specific 60 seconds, you can see you can have about 112 radios reporting its position in a 1 minute increment. And you'll also see it's on 90% channel load. 90% meaning out of the 60 seconds, only 90% of that 60 seconds the radios will report. If you reduce this to 50, then it will be less radios that can report. But it means for that 1 minute, only 90% of the minute's time, it will collect positions from the radios. Hope that makes sense. Is there any questions anyone has so far, or can I continue? Okay, nothing. Okay, let's go on. Sorry. Right, so sorry, I just want to move this one thing away. Okay, so this is where you would do your history track. So you'll see at the top of the Smart Dispatch, you'll see you've got the dispatching, GPS, messaging, reports, and then history track. So history track is if you wanted to see where a specific radio was in a certain time, you can go to that. You can select which radio you want to query, the start and the end time, and then when you go and search, it will bring up all the logs of the GPS positions for that radio in this time frame. And then you can also play back this on the map. It will show you all the positions where the radio was over that time period. Okay. Also the auto GPS polling service. So when you configure and set up the Smart Dispatcher, you can enable this. So when you want to change a specific reporting interval for a radio that's on the network, you can do it from the Smart Dispatch. You don't need to change the actual settings on the radio. So for example, if a radio was set for 2 minutes and now in a specific incident you want the radio to report every 30 seconds, you can, from the software, you can change the time for the radio, how it needs to report its position. I'll also show you guys on the actual software. And then the automatic GPS position. So it will automatically, as radios report their position, it will automatically update as well on the display on the map of the Smart Dispatch. It also supports offline maps. So normally when you install Smart Dispatcher, the computer that will be running the dispatching or the client, that needs to have an internet connection for it to load the Google Maps. If there's no internet connection, there's also an option for you to buy the offline map license, and then you can have the then you don't need internet connectivity on the computer. It will then have the maps stored locally on the PC. Okay. This just also illustrates again how the emergency comes through. So you'll see that the top red bar is to take the emergency, and the second one is to handle it. So you could then, if an emergency comes through, you take it, then you address it, and then once you've done, you can then close it and make a remark on it as well, what the incident or the emergency was for. This just also just shows you the text messaging function. So you'll see this is from the dispatcher, and you can also then reply to this, and also the person can then reply back to you. This here also shows you can disable specific radios from the Smart Dispatcher. So if there's an unknown radio that comes up on the software and you're not sure who it is, you can also disable that terminal or query it, or if the remote monitor is enabled on the radio, you can also do remote monitoring and open the microphone to listen to the surroundings of the radio. Okay, so this is just the navigation. So you'll see it's got all the radios here. And then you can also from here either click on them to check if they're online. If it's offline, like in this case, you can also do a call from here, do a text messaging, but I'll show it now on the software as well. This just some toolbars here for the map. I'll show you how that works as well when we do a demonstration on the actual software. Okay, so let's go into the actual topology of how the system works. So I just want to see if I can hide. I've got a screen here that's blocking my the view for me. Okay, so if we look at Smart Dispatcher, there's two ways for you to connect Smart Dispatcher to the radio network. So the one way is if there's no IP connection between Smart Dispatcher and the radio network, you can use a MD785 mobile radio. There's a specific cable that connects between the PC and the radio, which is a PC43 cable. This cable has 3 outputs. So it's got a USB, it's got a mic in and a speaker out. So you can have your audio then going through your sound card, and all your data goes through the USB port. This is if you don't have IP connection. You can use a mobile radio. As long as this mobile is in coverage of the actual radio network, you can use a mobile to communicate into the network from the dispatcher. So the dispatcher will control this radio, what it needs to do into the radio network. If there is an IP connection, you can connect from the repeater directly to the smart dispatcher via IP, and then you would have access to the radio network through the IP network. So you'll see the maximum amount of mobiles that can be supported here is 4 mobiles. The reason why there's only a limit of 4 mobiles here is because of the computer hardware. So for every mobile that you're going to connect here, you need a dedicated sound card, because you're going to be sending audio in and out of the sound card to the radio. Also, most PCs only have 1 sound card, so if you're going to be installing 2, you need to make sure there's an additional sound card available for the second mobile radio to connect. Normally, you would have 2 mobile radios here to communicate to the radio network. 1 radio for voice and 1 for GPS. That's what Gert says. Yeah, so you could dedicate a specific mobile radio for voice or only for data, or you can use both radios for voice and data, because the Hytera radios support the pseudo trunk function. So if you enable pseudo trunk on the radios, then you would set the radios to be for voice and for data, because the radios can report on either slot 1 or slot 2, whatever is available at that time when the radio is being used to communicate with. Okay. This also just illustrates the voice dispatching. So you'll see from the client, which is the dispatcher, which is used to log into the server. The server then connects to the gateway, and the gateway is connected to the radio network. So smart dispatch consists out of 3 components. You've got the client, server, and gateway. Client is your dispatching. Server is where all your information is stored, like your voice recordings, your GPS positions. And the gateway part is the interconnection between the radio network and the server. So any communication that happens in the radio network needs to go through the gateway, which then converts it to a VoIP for it to be able to record it as on this side. And then from the client side, is you would log into the server with a username and password, and you would then from here communicate to the gateway, from the gateway to the radio, into the radio network, or into the repeater. So this also just illustrates again a different example. So let's say you've got 3 dispatchers, they on 3 different computers, they logging into a server, and let's say there was a gateway PC at a different location, and then you've got a mobile connecting to the radios. It could be in simplex, or it could be via a repeater to the radios. So any of these dispatchers can communicate from this radio to the radio network. Just take note that if one dispatcher is talking, in this instance where there's only 1 mobile, the second or the third dispatcher won't be able to talk, because the first dispatcher is already making use of this radio. But if it's a group call, they will also, if they opened to be part of that group, they can also hear what the dispatcher is saying from here, and they can also communicate from here to the radio network from the same mobile than other dispatchers. So here's another example. So same as before, but now you've got 2 mobile radios. So this would be for slot 1 and this would be for slot 2. And it can either be for voice or for data. Okay, and then here's another example also where you've got 3 dispatchers logging into a server. Let's say you've got a location where you've got radios operating in a simplex or direct mode operation. You can have a PC with a mobile connected here, which can communicate from radio to radio directly. And let's say you've got another area where you've got a repeater installed. You can also then connect with using 2 mobile radios to the repeater, to the terminals in that network. And all of this, if there's GPS enabled, all of this can have GPS tracking. All of that can be visible to the dispatcher as well. Here's another example. If you're using IP to connect from the repeater to smart dispatch, so the repeater would be connected via IP to the smart dispatch gateway, which is then connected to the server, and the dispatchers can then talk via IP all the way to the repeater, and from here it will then be transmitted in RF to the radios. Sorry, let me just see if there's another question. No. Okay. Okay, so here's another example also where you've got a simplex and then you've got an IP multi-site setup here. So you've got your master repeater with all your slaves connected to your master. Normally you would only register your master to the gateway, because anything that happens on any of the slaves will in any way go to your master, and your master will send that information to the gateway, to the server, and it will be stored here. And you can also from the dispatch communicate this way to the master or to any of these slaves over the IP network. Okay, so just some performances and some stats that you guys need to know. So one smart dispatcher system can support a maximum of 32 clients. So 32 clients meaning, if I go back to this slide, so you can have a maximum of 32 people logging in to the server at a single point in time. You can have a maximum of 24 gateways connecting to the server. So this means that this gateway PC, you can have a maximum of 24 of these PCs at 24 different locations connecting to the server. One server can support a maximum of 16 repeaters, meaning 32 channels. So if we go back this way, so let's say if you had a master repeater in one area, a master repeater in a different area, you can have a maximum of 16 different radio networks registering to the gateway to the server here, meaning there will be 32 channels, because 16 repeaters gives you 32 channels. So you'll have 32 different channels that you can communicate from the dispatcher. And you can also make use of the audio link if you want specific groups on one network to talk to another group in a different network. Okay. And then also one gateway can support a maximum of 16 repeaters, so as I mentioned before. And then one voice channel needs about 100 kilobits of bandwidth. So you'll see it's very small bandwidth needed. Because your repeater has 2 time slots, so you need 200 kilobits bandwidth between the gateway and the repeater if you're going to use an IP connection. This is just some system requirements for the hardware. So you need, you'll see most of these things are low spec, so you don't need a very powerful computer to do this. But my suggestion is always to overspec it, because it's better to have, for the user experience, it's better to have, instead of having a normal HD hard drive, to have an SSD, because it allows you to be able to search information quicker, be able to pull information as well quicker from this actual software. Here's the different requirements for the different PCs. So if you, for the server part, you need about 2 gigahertz a dual core processor, or you could be an i3 or i5. For the client PC, you'll see it doesn't require a lot of processing as well. And then for the gateway part, this is to convert from the radio network to the server. You'll also see it doesn't require a lot of hardware as well. You'll see the server here, where it needs more storage capacity, because this is where all your recordings are going to be done. So you'll see between 12 to 1 terabyte storage. And then you'll see on this here, there's no big storage needed, as long as you have, if you're going to connect with a mobile radio with a PC43 cable, you would also need to have a sound card as well for this gateway. If it's going to be connecting via IP, then you don't need a sound card on the gateway. Okay, thank you so much. Let me quickly share the actual software to you guys. Sorry, let me just share my screen quickly. Okay, so everybody can see the Smart Dispatcher here in front of you guys. So if we look at Smart Dispatcher, so you'll see on the top left here at the top, you can click here, you can hear from here, you can change the language. Here you can choose what type of map you want to use, if you want to use OpenStreet or Google Maps. So I've selected Google Maps because it also has satellite. From the settings here, you can select which speakers you want the audio to come out if someone's talking from their radio to the dispatcher. If you have headphones connected, you would normally select your headphones. or if you have external speakers, you would select that. Your microphone as well, here you can choose which microphone you want to use. And then from here, you can also then set what audio must be left and right. So especially if you have stereo headphones and you want specific groups or specific emergencies to be on the left, and you want normal general groups to be on your right, you can then set it here to be left or right, depending on your requirements. You can also, if you don't want to have straps, let's say for example, if you're tracking radios and you don't want the lines to be behind the radios to show where they were, you can disable it so it won't show the actual track on the map where the radio was. You can also set what units you want to meet. So if you want to meet in kilometers, meters, or miles, you can select that here. And you can also update the time if you want to sync the time with the network as well. From the call settings point of view, sorry. So yeah, from call settings, here you can decide if you want to use a space bar, or if you want to use specific keys from the keyboard for you to be able to PTT, you can set it here. Earlier I mentioned if an emergency comes through to the software, if you don't want it to jump to the map to show where the emergency is, you wouldn't select this. But if you want every time when an emergency comes through, the screen must jump to the actual map and show on the map where the emergency is, you can then enable it here. You can also, when the emergency comes through and you want it to shrink on the screen, you can do it here, or you can mute it if you don't want to get emergency alarms coming through to the specific client. And direct channel also gives you a direct channel to the emergency. Okay, that's just the VoIP port being used. And then also private call. If you want to mute private calls, you can also mute it from here. Map settings, this is if you're going to be using the offline map and you upload or download the actual map, and then you upload it into the software from here. So here you would go and select it and then upload it in. If there's no internet connection to the actual, from the PC to the internet. Yeah, you can also set your logs. So if something went wrong and we investigated, we can then pull the logs and see what went wrong on the software, if there were specific things that were blocked or so. And then yeah, you can also set if you want to mute specific groups. So if you activate it here, you can choose what group you don't want to hear. So for example, if it's a general group that you don't want to be part of, you can then mute it from here as well. And you can also give it a name and a description as well. Any questions anyone has so far? Okay, let me continue. Right, so that's from the settings. You can also change the password. So when you log in as a dispatcher, you would have a password, username and password. Yeah, if you want to change it, you can then do it from here as well. And then also, you can also change your call ID. So like I mentioned in the previous sessions, every radio, every repeater has a unique radio ID. The dispatchers as well, every dispatcher will have its own unique radio ID. This is for you to be able to see who's talking. When you have a display radio, it will show the caller alias on your display. If the alias or the caller isn't saved on your radio's contacts, it will just show the radio ID. And from here, you can then set what caller ID you want to use as a radio ID. Normally, this function isn't available for the dispatcher. Because I'm logged in as the administrator now, I've got full access to all the functions. But I'll show you now how to change or create dispatches as well. So you'll see here on the left-hand side, you've got your slot 1, slot 2, which is for the repeater. I don't have a repeater connected to the system here, so that's why it's gray and not yellow. And then here you can see the different radios. So you'll see I've changed, this one is a portable, that's a mobile, and that's a person on a bicycle, for example. From here, if you click on the right-hand side, okay, because the radio is offline now, it doesn't show me, give me all the information. But from here, I can do a check online, I can do a call, I can do a remote monitor, I can do a call alert, I can enable or disable the low speed alarm, I can do messaging, I can disable, and then once I've disabled, I can also then enable it again. I can do telemetry, over the air programming. I can start lone worker. Lone worker is the person that's got the radio with them. they need to interact with the radio in certain intervals. If there's no interaction with the radio, it will automatically trigger the alarm. It's similar to man down, but with this, you need to press PTT or interact with the radio to avoid it from sending an emergency. This is used when people need to do a survey and they're on them by themselves. If they don't interact with the radio, it means something went wrong, and then you can then react on it. Then you also can do GPS position. So when you do GPS position when the radio is online, it will give you the exact position of where the radio is at that moment. And then also start tracking is if you want to enable the tracking, you can then set time or distance, and it will then start tracking the radio. And then reset tracking is when you want to reset the tracking and change some parameters. You'll also see it's got a history track here. So if I click on that, it will jump to the history track. And then from here, I can then select which radio I want to query. I can say from what date to what date. And then when I go and say search, it will then bring up the information. Because this isn't connected to any system, there's no data recorded here. But normally you would have a log file here at the bottom. And you can also then show all the positions, or you can play back from here, and it will then show you where the radio was within that time. Okay, let's go back here. So that's the history track, and then you can also go and say show on map. Because there's no position of where the radio was before, it won't show you on the map itself. But you can see this is satellite view, but you can also change it to show it like this. Satellite view is mostly used for if you're off main roads or national roads, like for example in the forestry or in game reserves. Then you would use satellite view because you would then be able to see buildings and all that. Okay. So that's all the functions here on the left. You'll see here's dispatcher. So if you had multiple dispatchers created on the system, you can also then from here choose which dispatcher you want to talk to, and then you'll be able to communicate from dispatcher to dispatcher. And then here's the subcall function. So if I go back to the dispatching view, you'll see here's the subcall. This is what the subcall would look like. So let me just move it here. Okay, it doesn't want to put it there. But from here, you can do a manual dial and phone a number. Let's say the number was 082456. When this is connected to a SIP server, you'll be able to make the phone call into the public network, and you'll be able to communicate with that cell phone. If, let's say, you wanted to connect this call to a radio, you'll have this function here. Okay, because nothing's online at the moment, you'll be able to click on this, and it will give you a drop down of all the radios, and you can select which radio you want to communicate to or have this SIP call communicate to. Okay, so that's the SIP phone capabilities. And then you've got audio link here. So like I mentioned before, audio link is if you have two different groups and you want to link the two groups to be a single group, you can enable or disable it here. I'll show you now how you can configure this as well. So I'm going to just close this one. So this is the dispatching window. So you'll see normally you will be able to select from here what group you want to talk to as well. Okay, so this is the GPS. So if there was actual live radios on the system, you'll be able to see them on the map where they are at that position or at that time. If a radio is switched off, it will show its last position on the map, and it will also be gray to show that it's offline. And you can, if you move the mouse over it, it will actually tell you the position, the last position that it sent. It will give you the time and everything. Okay. Let's get rid of that. Okay, here's the messaging screen. So from here, you can choose if you want to do a group or private message. If you select group, you can then say which group you want to send the message to. Let's say group 1. And then I can now type whatever I want to send, and I can then send that message. Because I'm not connected to a system, it will ask me now if I want to resend it, but there's no network here. If I want to do a private call, I can then go here, and then I can select I want to do a message to, let's say, radio 2, and then I can do the message from here to radio 2. And then if this radio responds back to me, okay, see, it's giving me a message notification because the radio is offline. But if the radio was online, it would then send it to the radio, and the radio can then also respond back to me, and I'll then be able to see the message on the display here. Okay, so that's the messaging. Okay, then for the reporting side, so like I mentioned, there's multiple types of reports that you can pull. So from here on the left side, you can choose if I want to do a call, message, disable, enable, lone worker, online, offline, geofencing. I'll explain geofencing now. Low speed, overspeed, lone worker, telemetry, and all. So if, for example, I selected call, I can then choose from what date to what date. So let's say from Sunday to today. If I wanted a specific radio, I can select it here, into which group. And then I can then go and search. Because there's no information on here, because there's no system connected, you would normally see the person that made the call, to which group it was done, the type, if it was a group or private, and then the time when it was done, and also the duration. And then you can also play back the audio from here at the top. You can actually listen to the recording as well. For messaging, similar, you can search it. It will give you the sender, the receiver, the time, and also what was in that message, and if it was a group message or a single private message. Online, offline, similar. So you can, from here, you see the radio, the time, and if it was on or off. Emergency, let me just show you guys this one quickly. Emergency, you can see from which radio the alarm was sent from, at the time and date, who was the person that took the emergency, and what was the time it was resolved, and then all of that information will be here. And you can also from here export the information to Excel. Like I mentioned before, you'll see at the bottom here there's an Excel tab which you can click on, and you can export it as well. Okay, so these are just some of the functions. So you'll see there's quite a lot of reporting you can do. If you select all, it will give you all of the information. Every single interaction that went through the smart dispatcher will be shown on this screen here. So that's for the reporting. Okay, history tracker I already showed. And then from the configuration side, so because I'm logged in as the administrator right now, I can also, from here, I can see, okay, so currently there's only one repeater configured on the system, and I've selected it as voice, but it's voice and data. Here's the group. So if there's another group that needed to be added, I can go and add it. So the group ID, let's say if it was group ID 10, and I can then say, let's say if it was group 10, I can then go and create it here. I can give it a description, and then I can go and say save. So once I've saved it here, you'll see automatically now there's group 10 showing. You can also from here, you can change. So it shows group 3, group 10, and group 2. Okay, so that's for your groups. For radio management, here you would normally go and add your radios to the system. So let's say if I wanted to add a new radio and the radio was ID 4, I'll go and say radio ID 4. I'll say radio 4 here, or whatever the name is. It can be Jack or John or whoever. Type, if it was a digital, I'll select digital. If it was analog, I'll select analog. And if it was a patrol radio, I would then select PD415 there. Okay, yeah, I can choose what icon I want to use. So I can use bicycle, car, mobile, motorcycle, portable, or truck. So let's say if it was a motorcycle, I'll select motorcycle. I can put a description to say if it was an armed action person or a medic or whatever. I can put a description here. You'll also see here it says upload. So if I click here, I can then also upload an actual photo of the person that's going to be using the radio. And it will then also show the person's face when they communicate with the dispatcher. Work group, here I can select which group this radio is going to be part of. So let's say if this radio is going to be in group 10, I'll select group 10. And then I can also choose, if it is a GPS radio, I can then select GPS. And then here I can say if it's going to be reporting on time or if it's going to be reporting on distance. And then I can save it. So once I've saved it here, you'll see it will add this radio now to the left here. Okay. User accounts, this is for you to create dispatches. So here I can create a dispatcher. So let's say if I create myself, Franco, I can then use it there. Let's say, sorry, I can then use it there. Then I can say I'm going to be group 10 or ID 10, and then I can put a description. Then I'm going to put my passwords, and then from here I can then decide what functions I'm going to give this dispatcher. So I'm only going to give you access to repeater slot 1 or slot 2, and then I can also say I don't want this dispatcher to be able to talk to group 10, but it only needs to be able to talk to group 2, for example. I can then enable it there, and then I can also from here choose what features I want this dispatcher to have. If I don't want him to be able to see GPS, I then won't give him this function. If I want him to be able to do messaging, I'll enable that. So from here, you can then also select all these functions. So if I don't want him to have OTAP, over the air programming, I won't select that, but if I want him to have geofencing alarms, so then I can create the dispatcher from here. Okay. The audio link function. So like I mentioned before, you can then have two groups linking to each other. So from here, I can then say, okay, I want to use slot 1 for group, let's say group 2, and I want to use slot 2 for group, for let's say all call on there, and then I can save it. So once I've done this, and then I go here to the left, once I tick on here, it will enable this audio link between the two groups then to talk to each other. And once the emergency is handled or whatever the case is, you can then disable it and they'll be separate groups again. Here's the email setup. So if you're going to be using the email capabilities, you'll set it up here. Time messaging. So here you can set the timing messages every week at a certain time. It sends a message to a specific group or to a radio, and then what the content of the message must be, who it must target, at what time and day, and so on. You can all set that up here. Telemetry is configured here, and then low speed alarm is also configured here. Yeah, so I think that's it from me. Is there any questions anyone has or that they would like to ask, or is the information a bit too detailed? Now's the time to ask. Okay, any questions anyone has? Okay, Gert, do you have a question you can ask, or you can message? Let me see. Okay, I already answered that question before, yes. Any questions? We have a few minutes still, so if there's any questions that anyone has or want to know about Smart Dispatch or any other question, is also welcome.
Oh, that was awesome. Thank you, Franco. The presentation, those slides, would you be able to send us the, like where you gave all the advantages and so forth?
Yeah, sure. I'll send you the slides. So what I'll do is, let me just see if I can, sorry, I just want to, can you send me or send me an email, then I'll reply to you with the slide. Here's my email address. I'll send it, yeah?
Awesome.
If anyone else wants it, you can just send me an email and then I'll send you the presentation of this. I've shared my email address there on the message now.
Got it. Thank
Is
you.
there anything? Welcome. Any other questions anyone has?
Franco?
Yes.
The amount of repeaters you can have on an IP site, so it's only so it's 16 repeaters per on one system. Or the amount of IP site you can have, or is it like 426 if I'm correct?
Okay, so I understand what you're asking. Okay, so let me quickly share my screen quickly here. So if we look at, so one Smart Dispatcher system can support a maximum of 16 repeaters, which is equivalent to 32 channels. Okay, but this 32 channels could be like this, where you've got one master which is equivalent to 1 repeater, and this one master can have 224 repeaters connecting to it. But because remember, you on a tier 2 system, you only have 2 time slots. So you can have 1 repeater, or you can have 50 repeaters connected to that 1 repeater, but essentially you only have 2 time slots across the network. And normally what would happen is you would only have your master repeater connecting to the smart dispatcher. Anything that happens on any of the slaves will come to the master, and the master will send that information to the smart dispatch. So you can have 32 different networks connecting, 16 different networks connecting to the smart dispatch. I hope that answers the question, or that you wanted to know, Gert.
Yeah, the master, and then obviously that question was how many slaves. So it's up to 220 slaves with one master.
Yeah, so you can have one conventional IP multi-site system can have up to 224 repeaters connected over an IP network. In the presentation I'm going to be doing on Thursday, I'm going to be demonstrating and showing and talking about that. But yeah, you can have 224. I think on other systems, for example, like I know Motorola, you're limited only to 15 repeaters that you can have as a maximum connected over an IP network.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, so that was just the difference between the two mics. But yeah, thanks, that helped.
Yes. Okay. I can see Maurice asked a question: does Hytera have any future plans to integrate the POC solution to this dispatcher? Okay, so to answer Maurice's question, we already have another package called Smart One, and Smart One has the capabilities for you to be able to connect from this dispatcher to a trunking system, to Tetra, to POC. But Smart Dispatcher was designed for conventional only. Smart One is the professional unified communication solution, which allows for you to be able to interface into different systems and different technologies. So not Smart Dispatcher, but Smart One does that. Okay, you're welcome. Any other questions anyone has? Okay, so if there's no more questions, we have recorded this session, so we'll share it with everyone. And then if there's anyone that's looking for this presentation, I can share it to you. You can just send me an email and I'll respond to you with a link to download the presentation. Okay. Thank you so much, everyone. You must have a nice week, and we'll see each other again on Thursday. Thursday, I'm going to be talking about the different solutions and IP multi-site and those type of things. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Franco. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Franco. Cheers.